The parable in Luke chapter 18, verse 9 to 14 has two characters. The first one is the Pharisee who exemplifies pride in his prayers. And the second one is the tax collector who exemplifies humility in his prayer. The pride of the Pharisee is seen in one, his confidence in self. The Pharisee in the story is the epitome of one who is self-righteous, the epitome of one who is self-justifying. Verse 9 says, to some who were confident of their own righteousness. Friends, self-confidence can be a sign of pride and dependence on self rather than depending on God. As believers, there is nothing we can do to save ourselves. We are only justified before God based on the finished work of Christ at the cross. Apart from the pride of the Pharisee being seen in his self-confidence, it also comes out through his condemnation of others. The second part of verse 9 shows that the Pharisee despised others. You know, he looked down on others. He scorned others. He was contemptuous of others. He had this condemning attitude towards others. Verse 9 says, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down. They looked down on everybody else. Jesus tells this parable. And dear ones, we should guard against the attitude of condemning others just because they do not measure up to our known standards. Well, the pride of the Pharisee is also evident through his comparison with others. He compares himself with others whom he considers worse than himself and thinks he's much better. Verse 11 says, the Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. God, I thank you that I am not like other men. Comparison there. Lord, I thank you that I'm not like other men. You know, those robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like these tax collectors. He's so full of comparison. And I put it to us, dear ones, that we must guard against comparing ourselves and gaining confidence from what we see in that comparison. Our standard of comparison is God Himself. And you know what? We all have sinned and we fall short of the glory of God. Well, the last sign of pride exemplified by the Pharisee is commendation of self. Now, after he finished comparing himself to others, the Pharisee then blows his own trumpet and takes pride in what he does. He certainly had plenty to say about himself. Verse 11 and 12, the Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. It's all about himself. What a shame. And this is how his prayer goes. God, I thank you that I am not like other men. The I problem here. I am not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. It is sad that the entire prayer of the Pharisee is about himself. It's about his good works. It's about his righteousness. And dear ones, it is important for us to guard against these things because they're signs of pride. Let me change gears for a moment and consider the humility of the tax collector. Well, the humility of the tax collector is seen in his conviction. He is deeply convicted of sin. He is so convicted of his state. He doesn't feel like he is righteous. He doesn't feel like he has done anything worth winning him favor before God. Look at verse 13. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Whereas the Pharisee thought of others as sinners, the tax collector sees himself as a sinner and asks for God's mercy. Friends, I put it to us that conviction regarding who we truly are can help us remain humble before God. Yes, we need deep conviction about who we truly are, our sinful state, our condition, so that we can know how to approach God better in humility. The humility of the tax collector is also evident through his contrition. Contrition has the idea of being very sorry for something wrong which you have done. His posture spoke of his unworthiness before God. Apart from standing at a distance in the temple and not looking up to heaven, the burden of his guilt and shame weighed heavily upon him, that he beats his breast, as he prays, because the burden of guilt and shame weighed down on him. Friends, let us learn to show humility by being contrite. You know what? God cannot despise a broken and contrite spirit. But apart from showing his humility through his conviction and contrition, this tax collector also reveals his humility through confession. He confesses of his sins and seeks God's mercy. What a sign of humility. His confession is evident as he prays and says, God, have mercy on me. And you know what? Jesus concludes the parable by saying the following words in verse 14. I tell you that this man, that is the tax collector, rather than the other, that is the Pharisee, went home justified before God. Wow! For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Jesus actually commends this humble tax collector as one who went home justified before God. The main lesson we get from this passage is that God reproves us when we exalt ourselves, but He approves of us when we humble ourselves. How I pray that we shall not be proud individuals who portray self-confidence, condemnation of others, comparison with others, and self-commendation. Instead, let us be humble people who exemplify conviction, contrition, and confession.